She looked at me and said, "You don't realize your effect." And just like that, my world tilted. It started with a casual invitation. My friend asking me to join his family for dinner at his aunt's house. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe just polite conversation, small talk about work and weekend plans. But the moment I walked in, something shifted, though I didn't realize it yet. She was there before I noticed her fully. Standing by the window, a cup of tea in hand, sunlight catching strands of her dark hair and making them glint like copper. She was talking quietly to someone else, but her presence had a quiet gravity that made the room feel warmer. She wasn't loud or dramatic, but she didn't need to be. There was a confidence in the way she held herself, the way she laughed softly at a small joke, and the way she tilted her head as she listened. When she looked at me, I felt it immediately. Not judgmental, not intrusive, but curious, observant, like she was cataloging every little detail, noticing more than I realized I was projecting. My chest tightened for a moment. I cleared my throat, trying to act casual, even though my own curiosity was prickling. Our first words were simple, almost mundane. She asked me about my studies, about what I did for fun, and I answered cautiously, aware that I was being watched more than I expected. Then, without any warning, she smiled, that small, knowing smile, and said, "You don't realize your effect." I froze. For a second, I thought she was teasing, but the weight in her voice told me she wasn't. I didn't know how to respond. My mind scrambled for something witty or clever, but nothing came. I nodded awkwardly, and she laughed lightly, the kind of laugh that makes your stomach twist in a mix of embarrassment and warmth. That brief moment stayed with me, even as the conversation shifted to other topics. There was something about her energy that made ordinary things feel charged. The warmth in the room seemed to hinge on her presence, like her attention could subtly tilt the air. I noticed the gentle gestures, how she held the teacup, the soft curve of her fingers, the way she leaned slightly forward when she spoke, not out of necessity, but out of interest. Even when she wasn't looking at me directly, her aura made it feel like I was the only person she could be seeing. It wasn't just attraction. It was intrigue, curiosity, and that strange, slow-burning sense of something unspoken that makes your pulse quicken without reason. That night, I realized there was more at play than a casual family dinner. Something had shifted quietly, almost imperceptibly, but undeniably. And in that shift, I found myself both nervous and eager, wondering how I had managed to leave such an impression on someone I had just met. It was the start of something subtle, slow, and entirely uncharted. A connection that would unfold not in grand gestures, but in glances, touches, and moments that felt like they existed just for the two of us. That first impression lingered long after I left, echoing in my thoughts with the weight of her words. "You don't realize your effect." After that first evening, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Not in a way that felt like infatuation, at least not exactly. It was more subtle, like noticing sunlight through the leaves or the smell of rain before it falls. It was noticing her, really noticing her, in ways that felt quietly thrilling and somehow grounding at the same time. Our next encounters were unplanned, almost incidental. I would run into her at the grocery store when my friend was visiting, or she would be sitting in the small cafe near my apartment, reading a book I happened to glance at from the doorway. Each meeting was casual, but layered with unspoken acknowledgement. She had a way of making the ordinary feel like it was charged with significance. The brush of her fingers when passing me a sugar packet, the faint tilt of her head as she smiled and greeted me. I began noticing everything. She never forced attention or flirted overtly. Instead, it was in the small gestures, the ease of her presence, the way she asked questions and listened, really listened. "How have you been?" she asked one afternoon over coffee, and it wasn't a polite nod. It was deliberate, focused, like she wanted to know not just what I was doing, but who I was. I found myself answering more honestly than I intended, sharing details I usually kept to myself. There was also a quiet rhythm to our interactions, a gentle push and pull. When I laughed at something she said, her eyes would linger a fraction longer than necessary, and I'd feel the warmth spread through me. When she mentioned something from her past, or a subtle disappointment, I noticed a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. Quick, almost invisible, but it made her feel profoundly human and accessible. I began noticing my own reactions, too. How my stomach would tighten when she glanced my way unexpectedly. How my words sometimes stumbled when I tried to act casual around her. How I lingered on her presence after she left, replaying gestures and phrases, analyzing them like clues to a puzzle I didn't yet want to solve. And still, everything remained within the boundaries of civility and friendship. The tension was quiet, simmering just beneath the surface. A brush of her hand when handing me a notebook, a playful nudge during a game, the way she leaned closer than necessary to hear my response. All harmless, but weighted with unspoken possibility. By the end of one rainy afternoon, I realized something subtle had shifted. I was no longer just seeing her as my friend's aunt, or a distant adult figure. She was becoming someone I wanted to understand, to be near, to witness moments with. And in some quiet corner of her awareness, I suspected she felt the same pull, the recognition that our connection, whatever it was, mattered more than it should in the span of casual interactions. That's when it hit me. The effect she had on me wasn't fleeting. It lingered, like warmth radiating from a fire long after the embers had faded. And perhaps, just perhaps, the words she had spoken that first evening were true. I didn't fully realize the effect she had, either. It wasn't a single moment that changed everything, but a slow unraveling of quiet trust. Over the next few weeks, our casual encounters turned into intentional ones. A shared coffee here, a chance meeting at the park there. Nothing overt, just moments where our worlds brushed closer than either of us expected. One afternoon, we found ourselves sitting side by side on a weathered wooden bench in the park, leaves drifting lazily in the golden sunlight. She was unusually quiet, tracing the rim of her coffee cup with her fingertip, eyes distant. I hesitated, unsure whether to speak or to respect the silence, but something in her posture invited a gentle intrusion. "You seem tired today?" I said softly, careful not to sound intrusive. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time I saw the weight she carried, the subtle lines of worry on her face, the soft slump of her shoulders. It wasn't exhaustion from a day's work. It was a quiet loneliness, a vulnerability she rarely allowed anyone to witness. "I've had a lot on my mind," she admitted, her voice low, almost hesitant. "I don't usually share this kind of stuff." And just like that, the invisible barrier between us softened. I shifted slightly closer, careful to respect space but wanting to offer presence. "You can tell me if you want," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I promise I'll just listen." She glanced at me, a flicker of surprise crossing her features, as if the offer itself was rare. Then, slowly, she shared a memory from years ago, a mistake she regretted, a fear she couldn't shake, and I listened, completely absorbed. There was no judgment, no unsolicited advice, just quiet attention, the kind that makes someone feel safe to reveal pieces of themselves they usually guard. When I shared a small insecurity of my own, something about always feeling out of place, never entirely sure of myself in social settings, she listened with that same rapt attention. She didn't offer platitudes. She simply nodded, acknowledged, and sometimes smiled, a gentle reassurance that my words mattered. There was a rhythm in our exchange, a subtle give and take that felt intimate without being overt. Her hand brushed against mine briefly as she gestured, and I felt a spark, not of desire exactly, but of connection, of recognition. It lingered longer than it should have, a quiet thrill that made my pulse quicken without a word being spoken. By the end of the conversation, the world outside the park seemed distant. The rustling leaves, the soft hum of traffic, even the warm afternoon sun. They all faded into the background, leaving only the space between us, charged with a quiet, unspoken understanding. That day, I realized something profound. Attraction wasn't just about physical presence. It was in the vulnerability, the trust, the shared silences, and the subtle ways we allowed each other into our private worlds. And in her eyes, I glimpsed the same recognition, the awareness that we were treading into a connection that was no longer casual, no longer simple. As we parted, she smiled softly, that faint curve of lips that lingered in my mind long after she walked away. There was curiosity in that smile, a quiet question without words. And I knew, with a certainty I hadn't expected, that neither of us would ever look at each other after that afternoon in the park. Everything between us seemed quieter yet heavier with unspoken meaning. Our interactions started carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. It wasn't that we said more often, it was what we didn't say that mattered most. The pauses, the soft smiles, the way our glances lingered just a second too long. All of it created a tension that felt almost tangible. It happened first during a casual group gathering at my friend's apartment. She sat beside me on the couch, just close enough that our shoulders brushed. I noticed the faint scent of her perfume, a delicate mix of jasmine and something softer, that seemed to settle around me. Our hands bumped lightly as we reached for snacks at the same time, and neither of us pulled away. Instead, she let the touch linger, and I felt a flutter in my chest, a rush of awareness I couldn't ignore. There were little moments like that, repeated over days and weeks. A playful nudge when she teased me about being overly cautious, the way she leaned closer to hear a joke I whispered, the subtle brush of her hand against mine when passing something back. Each touch was innocent, yet layered with unspoken curiosity. Every smile she gave me seemed slightly more personal, slightly more knowing, and I caught myself analyzing it long after the moment had passed. Even in our casual conversations, the flirtation was understated but persistent. She would comment on my expressions or gestures, pointing out little things about how I reacted to situations. "You really notice details most people miss," she said one evening, her eyes locking with mine. There was a softness in her gaze, a warmth that made me hesitate mid-response. The words weren't explicitly romantic, but the way she delivered them, with quiet attentiveness, made my pulse quicken. I too became conscious of how I reacted around her. I found myself adjusting the way I sat, the tone of my voice, even the way I laughed, aware that she was noticing. There was a magnetic pull, subtle but undeniable, and a growing awareness that we were treading a line neither of us could ignore. At one point, our conversation drifted to memories from our childhoods, the odd, funny, or awkward moments that had shaped us. She laughed at something I said, and our eyes met, holding longer than socially acceptable. My chest tightened, my mind stumbling for words, but all that came out was a quiet, "I never thought of it that way." She smiled softly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers lingering near her cheek in a way that felt intimate without demanding anything. By the end of that evening, the tension had settled into something deliciously ambiguous. I wasn't sure if it was attraction, curiosity, or simply the thrill of emotional closeness, but it mattered. Every glance, every touch, every pause carried weight, and I knew she felt it too. The air between us had changed, charged, warm, and quietly electric. That night, as I lay in bed replaying our interactions, I realized the truth. This was no longer just friendly admiration. The subtle flirtation, the lingering touches, the quiet glances, they were all part of a slow-burning connection that neither of us could deny. And the thought of it, impossible as it seemed, made my heart race in anticipation. Way again. The tension that had been simmering finally began to ripple into my thoughts in ways I hadn't expected. It wasn't just her presence anymore. It was what her presence made me feel. The subtle way my pulse would jump whenever she looked at me, or the warmth that spread through me when our hands accidentally brushed. And yet, as much as I wanted to give in to it, there was a voice in the back of my mind reminding me of boundaries, of age differences, of what was appropriate. It started small, almost imperceptibly. I found myself hesitating before replying to her texts, overthinking the tone of my messages, trying to be careful not to appear too eager. When I met her in person, I sometimes deliberately kept a small distance on the couch or avoided prolonged eye contact, even though my instincts screamed at me to sit closer, to lean in just a little. She too seemed aware of the shift. Her smile sometimes carried a flicker of uncertainty, her laughter occasionally tempered by hesitation. During a quiet evening at my friend's house, we sat across from each other at the dinner table. The moment our eyes met, I noticed the subtle tension in her posture, The way she crossed her legs slightly tighter than usual, the soft clenching of her hands in her lap. There was warmth in her gaze, yes, but also caution, as if she was testing the waters, wondering if it was safe to let her curiosity reach further. The conflict wasn't external. No one else was involved, and no one had questioned us. It was internal, a tug-of-war between desire and restraint, curiosity and propriety. Every laugh shared felt loaded. Every brush of a hand felt dangerous in its intensity, and every glance felt like a question neither of us dared voice. I began to notice my thoughts drifting at odd times, replaying the moments of contact, wondering what it would feel like to close the small distance between us, to let myself linger near her just a little longer. And yet, hesitation won out, time and again. The age gap, the social context, the fear of misreading signals, all of it weighed heavily on me. I avoided situations where our closeness might be too noticeable, walked a careful line between warmth and distance, and sometimes even found myself withdrawing for a brief moment to regain composure. One evening, after a particularly charged moment where our hands had touched briefly while passing a book, I stepped back and felt a wave of guilt mixed with longing. She noticed my pause, tilting her head slightly, her eyes searching mine. There was a silent acknowledgement there, a recognition that both of us were aware of the effect we had on each other, and of the complications it brought. It was exhausting, in a way I hadn't anticipated. The anticipation, the restraint, the constant replaying of gestures and glances. It all left me feeling more alive and more unsettled at once. I realized then that this connection wasn't just fleeting or superficial. It had the potential to become something profound. And with that realization came fear. Fear of crossing a line. Fear of losing her trust. Fear of misreading a subtle gesture that might change everything. By the end of that week, I understood one thing clearly. The tension between us wasn't just chemistry. It was a mirror of our hesitation, a reflection of the boundaries we each carried, and a quiet test of whether either of us would allow ourselves to cross it. It happened quietly, without fanfare or dramatic gestures, in a way that only made the moment feel more profound. The rain had begun outside, soft and rhythmic, tapping against the window pane like a metronome marking the passage of time. We had lingered in the living room long after my friend had gone upstairs, the space shrinking around us, becoming intimate in a way that made every glance, every slight movement feel magnified. She sat across from me, legs tucked slightly to one side, holding her mug of tea close to her chest. I noticed how her fingers gripped the handle, the faint tremor that betrayed her calm exterior. I, in turn, was acutely aware of the warmth radiating from the cup in my hands and the subtle closeness of her presence. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, full of words unsaid and emotions simmering beneath the surface. "You've changed since we first met," she said softly, breaking the quiet. Her voice carried a vulnerability I hadn't heard before, a quiet admission that she, too, had felt the growing pull between us. I swallowed, suddenly aware of how loudly my heart seemed to be beating, and nodded. I think I have," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "You've made me notice things about myself I didn't before." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the air between us was almost fragile in its intensity. "I wasn't expecting this," she confessed, her gaze lingering on mine. "This feeling, it's different from anything I've allowed myself to feel in a long time." She paused, then added, almost shyly, "And I think I've been waiting, without realizing it, for someone who could see me this way." Those words hung in the air like sunlight through mist, and I felt a shiver run through me. Not from the rain outside, but from the weight of her honesty. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, we leaned closer. Our hands brushed, first accidentally, then intentionally, fingers intertwining with a natural ease that felt like it had been waiting for this moment all along. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully acknowledge what I had been feeling. The curiosity, the admiration, the subtle thrill of her attention, all deepening into something undeniably emotional. And I realized she had felt the same. Every fleeting glance, every lingering touch, every playful comment acting as a bridge between us. The tension that had hovered for weeks dissolved, replaced by something quiet but profound, mutual recognition. I could feel her breath as she shifted slightly, her hand warm against mine. "I've never felt this drawn to someone younger," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly, but not with fear, with honesty. "I don't care about the age difference," I said softly, meeting her gaze fully. "I just want to be here with you like this." We didn't need more words. The rain outside, the soft creak of the floorboards, the lingering warmth of our hands. All of it spoke for us. For the first time, the connection between us wasn't tentative or restrained. It was recognized, mutual, and undeniably real. By the end of the evening, there was no declaration, no grand gesture. Only the quiet understanding that something had shifted forever. The unspoken tension had transformed into shared awareness, the slow burn into a steady, warm flame. And for the first time, I knew with certainty that we had crossed the invisible line from curiosity into something far deeper. The days after that evening felt different. The air seemed warmer, quieter, more intimate, as if the world had shifted subtly to accommodate what had begun between us. Every interaction, every glance, every small touch carried the weight of our unspoken acknowledgement. Attention now softened into something steady, something real. We didn't rush into labels or declarations. There was no urgency, no need for dramatic confessions. Our connection had grown too slowly, too deliberately for that. Instead, it unfolded naturally, in the spaces between ordinary moments. I found myself sitting closer to her when we shared a cup of coffee, our knees brushing lightly, fingers sometimes lingering as if afraid to let go. The warmth of her hand on mine became a quiet reassurance, a confirmation that what we were feeling was mutual. One evening, we found ourselves alone on the small balcony of her apartment. The city lights stretched out before us, flickering like distant stars. She wrapped her arms around her mug of tea, and I leaned slightly closer, feeling the warmth radiate toward me. The silence was comfortable, filled with all the words neither of us needed to say. "I never imagined it would be like this," she murmured, her voice soft and reflective. "I wasn't sure I could ever feel this way about someone younger. But here we are." Her fingers brushed a stray lock of hair from my face, and the gesture was gentle, intimate, yet carefully measured. "I feel the same," I admitted, my voice low. "I've been trying to make sense of it for weeks, but I can't. And I don't want to. I just want to be near you." Her smile was quiet, unassuming, but it held a depth that made my chest tighten. We reached for each other's hands, letting our fingers intertwine fully this time, unafraid. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't urgent, it was real. The connection that had built slowly, carefully, over weeks of subtle touches and quiet conversations, now had its own gravity. We talked then, for the first time fully about what this meant, acknowledging the age difference, the social context, and the hesitation that had marked the early days. We didn't see it as an obstacle, but as part of the story, part of what made this connection so delicate, so rare, and so worth honoring. There was laughter, of course, gentle teasing, and the soft comfort of someone who truly understood you. As the night deepened, we leaned into each other, a quiet hug that lasted longer than polite conversation would allow. It was a hand on a back, a gentle shoulder brush, a shared warmth that said everything words couldn't. It was a promise without labels, a reassurance that whatever the future held, this connection was real and lasting. When I finally left her apartment that night, I felt the weight of her words from the very first evening echoing back. "You don't realize your effect." But now I did. I realized it, and she realized hers on me. We had crossed from curiosity into intimacy, from hesitation into understanding, and in that we had found our own kind of happiness. The story didn't end with fireworks or grand gestures. It ended with quiet certainty, with warmth and mutual respect, with the knowledge that what had begun as a subtle intrigue had grown into something deeply human, profoundly real, and undeniably ours. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe for more slow-burn romances that explore love, longing, and the beauty of subtle connections. and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt a connection that changed everything without a word being spoken?